forces. He lost everything. He lost his mother, father, siblings, cousins. He lost all the hopes he had packed, and only he survived. He waited desperately for rescue for 12 days. Will you come to take me? I'm fearful. Was waiting for a helping hand to reach out to him for 12 days. Despite the level of our world has reached, despite the technology at our disposal, despite our organizations with huge budgets employing tens of thousands of personnel, as a human family of 8 billion inhabitants, we haven't yet managed to rescue a 6-year-old girl, which is actually like an injured sparrow trapped under the rubble that was shaking before our eyes. Hundreds of Gazan children died and are still dying because they cannot find a morsel of a dry bread, a sip of water, and a bowl of soup. In Gaza, not only children are dying, but also the United Nations system. The values that the West claims to defend are dying. The truth is dying. The hopes of humanity to live in a more just world are dying one by one. I am asking you bluntly here, openly, frankly. I call out to you, oh, human rights organizations. Are those in Gaza and the West Bank not human beings? Do children in Palestine have no rights? Can't they play out on the streets in their homelands safely? And calling out to the international press organizations, aren't the journalists murdered by Israel on live TV your colleagues, whose offices were actually raided as well? I call out to United Nations Security Council. What are you waiting for to prevent the genocide in Gaza, to put a stop to this cruelty, this barbarianism? What are you waiting for to stop Netanyahu and his network, who is endangering the lives of the Palestinian people, which is a part of a mass murder network? And what are you still waiting for to stop them, putting to danger their own people and the entire region for political gain? I would like to call out to the countries supporting Israel in an unconditional manner. How long are you going to be able to carry the shame of witnessing this massacre? Dear friends, while children are dying in Gaza, in Ramallah, in Lebanon, while babies are dying in incubators, unfortunately, the international community has given a very bad test and failed in a big way. What's happening in Palestine, look, is a sign of a great moral collapse. I believe that the peoples of the world, the leaders of countries and international organizations should reflect on this painful picture, upon this painful landscape. And I would like to state very clearly and loudly here, the Israeli government, disregarding basic human rights, trampling on international law at every opportunity, is practicing ethnic cleansing, a clear genocide against a nation, a people, and occupying their lands step by step. Palestinians, whose freedom, independence, and most basic rights have been usurped, are rightfully exercising their legitimate rights of resistance against this occupation and ethnic cleansing. The just resistance of the Palestinian people against the occupiers of their land is too noble. It's honorable and legitimate to be called illegitimate. It's heroic and it's noble. The only reason for Israel's aggression against the Palestinian people is the unconditional support of group of countries. And I would like to wave at my brothers and sisters at the legitimate resistance in Palestine. As I've said before, the support of a group of countries for Israel is the reason why this aggression is still going on. Countries that have a say over Israel are openly complicit in this massacre, with a policy of run for the hare and catch the hound. Those who are supposedly working for a ceasefire in front of the stage continue to send arms and ammunition to Israel so that it can continue its massacres in the background. This inconsistency and this is insincerity. Look, there's a paper that has been going around back and forth since May. Hamas has repeatedly declared its acceptance of the ceasefire offer. But the Israeli government has made it very clear that this is the party that doesn't want peace by constantly dragging its feet, making a settlement of the dispute much more difficult, almost impossible, constantly finding an excuse and sneakily killing its negotiating partner at a time when it was closest to a ceasefire. Israel's stalling and deception should not be given any more credit. In the absence of the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution number 2735, coercive measures against Israel should be put on the agenda. Israel's behavior has once again demonstrated that it is imperative for the international community to develop a protection mechanism for Palestinian civilians. 70 years ago, just as Hitler was stopped by an alliance of humanity, Netanyahu and his murder network must be stopped by an alliance of humanity. We believe that the General Assembly's authority to recommend the use of force, as in the 1950 Resolution on Unity for Peace, should be considered in this process during this time. An immediate and a permanent ceasefire must be established. Hostages and prisoners must be exchanged. And humanitarian aid must be delivered to Gaza unhindered and uninterrupted. It's very, very important that we extend a helping hand to the people of Gaza, especially before the winter season when conditions on the ground will become even more challenging. Look, right now, 70% of the water supplies and 75% of the bakeries in Gaza have been destroyed. 95% of health centers were partially or completely damaged. 150,000 houses were completely destroyed, 200,000 houses were partially destroyed, and 80,000 houses become uninhabitable. Infectious diseases such as polio and hepatitis are on the rise. The people of Gaza receive only a quarter of the aid they urgently need. That's what they have access to. And as Turkey, we have been providing humanitarian aid to our brothers and sisters in Palestine, and we will keep on doing that. With more than 60,000 tons of aid, Turkey is the country sending the largest amount of aid to Gaza. Likewise, by halting commercial transactions with Israel, we have demonstrated our stance on this issue. Now, during the last couple of weeks, attacks by Israeli have been increased in Lebanon, and we are by the side of Lebanese people and the Lebanese government. We can see this truth for what it is. Those who murdered 41,000 people cannot rest until those who gave the orders, pulled the trigger, and dropped the bombs are held accountable for their crimes. We will not heave a sigh of relief. Our conscience will not go silent. The bill for the billions of dollars of damage caused in the cities that have been destroyed, wrecked, and reduced to rubble must and will be compensated by the perpetrators. We support the case brought by the Republic of South Africa at the International Court of Justice to ensure that Israel's crimes do not go unpunished. We will take every step necessary for justice to be served in the case for which we have applied as an intervener or as a party. We will fight for the blood of Ayşenur Ezgi Eygi, who was shot in the head and murdered by Israeli soldiers during a peaceful protest in Nablus. And we will fight in all legal remedies, and we will keep on doing that. While a ceasefire in Gaza is urgently needed, the underlying problem in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories. Based on the 1967 borders, an independent, sovereign, and geographically integrated Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital must come into being. This cannot be delayed any longer. I would like it to be known that we are closely following Israel's increasing attacks on our first Qibla, Al-Aqsa Mosque and Haram al-Sharif. I would like to state once again on this podium as Tayyip Erdogan once again that I'm not using a language of politics. I am encouraged by our ancestors who have always stood by the side of the victims honorably and nobly. We are a nation that has been on the side of the oppressed and against the oppressors and oppression throughout history. We are such a nation. We welcomed Jews fleeing the Inquisition 500 years ago and Jews fleeing Hitler's concentration camps. We opened our arms wide. We, as a country and a nation, I'll be very clear to say that we have no animosity or hostility towards the people of Israel. We oppose anti-Semitism in the same way we oppose the targeting of Muslims just because of their faith. Our problem is with the massacre policies of the Israeli government. Our problem is with the oppressor and the oppression, just as it was 5 centuries ago. Everybody should know about this. We will always speak of the truth and speak of what's right and what's fair. Even if some people will be uncomfortable, we will continue to shout out the truth and stand by the righteous and boldly say that we will speak of what we know is right, even though it will hurt some people. From here, I would like to thank all the courageous people who show solidarity with the Palestinian people without discrimination of faith, country, language, or religion, and who take to the streets almost every week to raise their voices against the massacres in Gaza. I would like to especially thank the university students and the youth. Distinguished delegates, unfortunately, in the 14th year of the conflict, Syria is still far from stability. The economic and humanitarian situation in the country, in the grip of terrorism and separatist organizations, remains dire. On the basis of UN Security Council Resolution 2254, we hope to advance the political process and achieve national reconciliation. We are determined to sincerely pursue our position in favor of a realistic dialogue. We are very sincere in that regard. Our neighbor Iraq, while continuing its fight against terrorism, is taking decisive steps towards development, reconstruction, and reintegration with its region. And the international community must support Iraq's efforts. In this context, it is important to implement initiatives such as the Development Road Project, which will benefit the entire region on a win-win basis. The success of all these efforts depend on the complete elimination of the terrorist threat in Iraq, in particular the PKK. We are strengthening our common action plan with another neighbor of ours, Iran, in the region in order to establish stability and peace. It's going to contribute tremendously to our efforts. The war in Ukraine has been going on for 3 years, and we are still away from establishing a permanent peace and stability. As the arms race accelerates, the space for diplomacy is shrinking. It's very important that diplomacy and dialogue will ensure territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine, and our support for those endeavors of Turkey will continue even strongly. And again, during this process, we are determined to implement the Montreux Convention on the Straits. We will rigorously implement the Montreux Convention. We support the peace process between Azerbaijan and Armenia and hope that this process will be concluded as soon as possible with good news. We support continued high-level contacts between the two countries, and we are focusing on dialogue. Turkey and Armenia, we are also taking positive steps on that track too. Progress in the Azerbaijan-Armenia peace process will have a positive impact on the Turkey-Armenia normalization process. Dear friends, we play a constructive role for the prosperity and peace at the Balkans, of which we are an integral part, and we act in close cooperation with all actors in the region. As a member of the Steering Committee for Peace Implementation Council, we emphasize the importance of the sovereignty, political unity, and territorial integrity of Bosnia and Herzegovina on every platform, and continue our contribution to Operation EUFOR Althea. We are successfully continuing the Key 4 command we assumed last year and supporting the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue process. We want to see the Aegean Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean as a zone of stability and prosperity where the legitimate interests of all the parties are concerned can be respected. It is in the common interest of the entire region to enhance cooperation, particularly on the delimitation of maritime jurisdictions in accordance with international law, freedom and safety of navigation, and maritime trade. International maritime law encourages cooperation between littoral states in closed or semi-closed seas, such as the Aegean Sea. Turkey is ready for constructive cooperation on all issues, especially in energy and environment. We have the longest coastline in the Eastern Mediterranean, and Turkey's key role is undeniable. Turkey has legitimate rights and authorities in the western part of the island of Cyprus, while the Turkish Cypriots have legitimate rights in the areas around the world. It has been 50 years since the Cyprus peace operation and 61 years since the Cyprus issue emerged as a result of the Greek-Cypriot usurpation of the partnership state. From that day until today, peace and tranquility have prevailed on the island. It was always the Turkish Cypriots and Turkey who put forth the sincere will to bring about a just, lasting and sustainable solution to the Cyprus issue. The federation model is now completely outdated, and we fully support the vision of a two-state solution with two different nations put forward by the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. The sovereign, equality and equal international status of the Turkish Cypriots, which are the vested rights of the Turkish Cypriots, must be re-registered and the isolation must end. Today, I once again invite the international community to recognize the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus and to establish diplomatic, political and economic relations. We actively support the stabilization of Libya and the preservation of the unity and integrity of the country. We call on all states to sincerely stand by Libya at this very sensitive time and contribute to building trust between the parties. We must do more to end the conflict in Sudan. We all have a responsibility to deliver humanitarian assistance to the millions of Sudanese people displaced by the conflict. With its young and dynamic population, rich natural resources, and vast fertile lands, Africa has enormous potential. Based on the principles of equal partnership and mutual respect, hand in hand with the peoples of Africa, we support the continent's efforts for peace, stability, and development. We will continue to stand in full solidarity with our African brothers and sisters. As part of our initiatives, we are strengthening our deep-rooted ties with Asia. We are deepening our engagement with our partner regional organizations such as ASEAN, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the Pacific Islands Forum. We keep our will to develop our relations with BRICS, which brings together emerging economies alive. We share a deep-rooted history with the countries of Central Asia, and we are further strengthening our cooperation on bilateral and multilateral grounds. Our Organization of Turkic States is gradually turning into a center of attraction. The organization is becoming an exemplary model of cooperation with the contributions of observer members Hungary and the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. We will further strengthen our unity and our togetherness as the Turkic world. And within the framework of respect for China's sovereignty and territorial integrity, we are in close dialogue with China to protect the fundamental rights and freedoms of Uyghur Turks, with whom we have strong historical, cultural, and humanitarian ties. We endeavor to build on the friendly ties we have established with the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. Distinguished delegates, we must work together to address global injustice. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals concept of leaving no one behind is a guiding principle for these efforts. As one of the largest aid donors relative to its gross domestic product, Turkey's development cooperation activities contribute to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. We contribute to efforts to ensure fair, inclusive growth and development in all international platforms, especially the G20, of which we are a member. We approach technological breakthroughs not as a source of new injustice and conflicts, but as a source of a more prosperous future, such as AI. We believe that all nations should equally benefit from the transformative power of these breakthrough technologies. The United Nations Technology Bank for Least Developed Countries, which we are hosting, is a concrete manifestation of our efforts in this direction. But unfortunately, the cyber terror attacks that took place in Lebanon last week show us once again how deadly these technologies can be used as weapons. I approach the climate change issue from that same perspective. No country can tackle emission reductions and climate change adaptation alone. The most important issues for developing countries are financing, technology transfer, and capacity building. I sincerely believe that the COP29 climate summit in Baku will contribute to the solution of these issues. At the summit, we expect to launch important additional initiatives and unveil our long-term low-emission development strategy and the zero waste initiative that became a reality under the auspices of my spouse, Madam Emine Erdogan. And with mutual agreements, we have taken our domestic affairs and initiatives to international agendas. I would like to ask everybody to support our endeavors in that regard. We see Islamophobia, xenophobia, and racism creeping over the world like a poison ivy. We can see that every week attacks are taking place upon our mosques and our holy book of Quran. In the middle of Europe, people's homes are set on fire and lives are taken because of their ethnic and religious affiliation. Their lives are taken away from them and their fundamental rights are being suspended. And nobody can ignore this growing danger any longer. On March 15th, 2024, we expect a special envoy to combat Islamophobia to be appointed at the United Nations as soon as possible, as envisaged in the draft resolution adopted on March the 15th. Today, I would like to draw your attention once again to the danger that I raised last year on this podium. Attacks on the institution of family, the pillar of society, are increasing. The disgrace staged at the opening of the 2024 Olympic Games has revealed the extent of the threat we face as humanity. A sporting event watched by innocent children and hundreds of millions of people of all ages and beliefs has been used as a tool for a sexist propaganda. It was actually a parade of bad scenes. Those disturbing scenes of evil have wounded not only the Catholic world, the Christian world, but everyone who respects the sacred values. The issue of desexualization is no longer an orientation, but a global imposition. It literally became a war against the sacred and human nature. We are facing a multidimensional, comprehensive, and ruthless project of destruction who are speaking out and who are reacting to this evil. Anyone who raises a voice for this annihilation project is silenced and targeted by lynch campaigns. And Turkey is determined to break this siege and resist the climate of fear. To this end, we became a member of the United Nations Friends of the Family Group. Inshallah, God willing, Together with other member countries, we will not hesitate to defend the family, the human being, and the human nature. I invite all the countries that share our sentiments to shoulder this struggle. With these thoughts in mind, I wish that the 79th General Assembly will be auspicious for all humanity. I greet you all once again with love and respect. May peace be with you and may you remain in health.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Turkey, The Assembly will hear an address by His Majesty King Abdullah II Ibn al-Hussein, King of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. I request protocol to escort His Majesty and invite him to address the Assembly.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Your Excellencies. Over the past quarter century, I have stood at this podium amidst regional conflicts, global upheavals, and humanitarian crises that have profoundly tested our global community. It often feels that there was not a moment when our world was not in turmoil. And yet, I cannot recall a time of greater peril than this. Our United Nations is facing a crisis that strikes at its very legitimacy and threatens a collapse of global trust and moral authority. The UN is under attack, literally and figuratively. For nearly a year, the sky blue flag flying over UN shelters and schools in Gaza has been powerless to protect innocent civilians from Israeli military bombardment. UN aid trucks sit motionless just miles away from starving Palestinians. Humanitarian workers who proudly wear the emblem of this institution are disparaged and targeted. And the rulings of the UN's International Court of Justice are defied, its opinions disregarded. So it's no surprise that both inside and outside this hall, trust in UN's cornerstone principles and ideals is crumbling. The harsh reality many see is that some nations are above international law, that global justice does bend to the will of power, and that human rights are selective, a privilege to be granted or denied at will. We cannot stand for that. And we must recognize that undermining our international institutions and global frameworks is one of the gravest threats to our global security today. Ask yourselves, if we are not nations united in the conviction that all people are equal in rights, dignity, and worth, and that all countries are equal in the eyes of the law, what kind of world does that leave us with. Your Excellencies, the attacks of October 7th on Israeli civilians last year were condemned by countries all over the world, including Jordan. But the unprecedented scale of terror unleashed on Gaza since that day is beyond any justification. The Israeli government's assault has resulted in one of the fastest death rates in recent conflicts, one of the fastest rates of starvation caused by war, the largest cohort of child amputees, and unprecedented levels of destruction. This Israeli government has killed more children, more journalists, more aid workers, and more medical personnel than any other war in recent memory. And let us not forget the attacks on the West Bank. There, since October 7th, the Israeli government has killed more than 700 Palestinians, among them 160 children. Palestinians held in Israeli detention centers exceed 10,700, including 400 women and 730 children. 730 children. Over 4,000 Palestinians have been forced from their homes and lands. Armed settler violence has surged, and entire villages have been displaced. And in Jerusalem, a flagrant violations of the historical and legal status quo at Muslim and Christian holy sites continue unabated under the protection and encouragement of members of the Israeli government. To be clear, this is in the West Bank, not Gaza. Almost 42,000 Palestinians have been killed since October 7th. So is it any wonder that many are questioning how can this war not be perceived as deliberately targeting the Palestinians? The level of civilian suffering cannot be written off as unavoidable collateral. I grew up a soldier in a region that is all too familiar with conflict. But there is nothing familiar about this war and the violence unleashed since October 7th. In the absence of global accountability, repeated horrors are normalized, threatening to create a future where anything is permitted, anywhere in the world. Is that what we want? Now is the time to ensure the protection of the Palestinian people. It is the moral duty of this international community to establish a protection mechanism for them across the occupied territories. This will guarantee the safety of Palestinians and Israelis from extremists who are taking our region to the brink of an all-out war. That includes those who continue to propagate the idea of Jordan as an alternative homeland. So let me be very, very clear. That will never happen. We will never accept the forced displacement of Palestinians, which is a war crime. No country in the region benefits from escalation. We have seen that clearly in the dangerous developments in Lebanon over the past few days. This has to stop. For years, the Arab world has extended a hand to Israel through the Arab Peace Initiative, offering full recognition and normalization in exchange for peace. But consecutive Israeli governments, emboldened by years of impunity, have rejected peace and chosen confrontation instead. Impunity gathers force. Left unchecked, it gains momentum. Palestinians have borne more than 57 years of occupation and oppression. During this time, the Israeli government has been allowed to cross one red line after another. But now, Israel's decades-long impunity is becoming its own worst enemy, and the consequences are everywhere. The Israeli government has been accused of genocide at the ICJ. Expressions of outrage at its conduct are echoing around the world. Cities everywhere have seen mass protests, and calls for sanctions are growing louder. International frustration with Israel has long been mounting, but it has never been more exposed. For decades, Israel has projected itself as a thriving Western-style democracy in the Middle East. But the brutality of the war on Gaza has forced the world to look closer. Now many see Israel through the eyes of its victims. And the contradiction, the paradox, is too jarring. The modern advanced Israel admired from afar, and the Israel that Palestinians have experienced firsthand, simply cannot coexist. Israel will eventually be entirely one or the other. That is the choice its leaders and its people will have to make. To live by the democratic values of freedom, justice, and equality for all, or to risk further isolation and rejection. Over and over, we have watched Israel try to achieve security through military means. Each escalation is followed by a pause until the next deadlier one. And for years, the global community has taken the path of least resistance, accepting the status quo of the ongoing military occupation of Palestinians, all the while paying lip service to the two-state solution. But it has never been more evident that the current status quo is untenable. And as the International Court of Justice's advisory opinion underscored 2 months ago, it is unequivocally illegal. The Court's opinion bears a moral imperative to us all. The obligation it carries is one that our nations cannot afford to ignore for the sake of our world, as well as the future for Palestinians and Israelis alike. Because both peoples deserve to live their lives in dignity, free of violence and fear. And the only way to achieve that is a just peace, one grounded in international law, justice, equal rights, and mutual recognition. That is something we, as nations and people everywhere, can and must unite around. Your Excellencies, the world is watching, and history will judge us by the courage we show. And it is not just the future that will hold us accountable, so will the people of the here and now. They will judge whether we, as the United Nations, will surrender to inaction or will fight to uphold the principles that anchor this institution and our world. Right now, they are asking whether we will stand by as parents watch their children waste away, as doctors watch their patients die for lack of basic medical supplies, and as more innocent lives are lost because the world failed to act. This war must end. Hostages and detainees must return home. But every day we wait is one day too long for far too many. So I call on all countries to join Jordan in enforcing an international Gaza humanitarian gateway, a massive relief effort to deliver food, clean water, medicine, and other vital supplies to those in desperate need. Because humanitarian aid should never be a tool of war. Whatever our politics, one truth is undeniable. No people should have to endure such unprecedented suffering, abandoned and alone. We cannot surrender the future to those who thrive on division and conflict. I urge all nations of conscience to unite with Jordan in the critical weeks ahead on this mission. Almost a year into this war, our world has failed politically, but our humanity must not fail the people of Gaza any longer. Echoing the words of my father from 64 years ago at the 15th session of the General Assembly, I pray that this community of nations may have the courage to decide wisely and fearlessly, and will act with urgent resolve that this crisis and our conscience demand. My father was a man who fought for peace to the very end. And like him, I refuse to leave my children or your children a future we have given up on. Thank you.
En nombre de la Asamblea.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the King of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan.
La Asamblea escuchará.
The Assembly will now hear an address by the President of my country, the Republic of Guatemala, His Excellency, Mr. Cesar Bernardo Arevalo de Leon. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly, and this is a very special honor for me.
Excelentísima.
Your Excellency Khaled Rodriguez, Vice President of the 79th session of the General Assembly. His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations Organization, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, honorable delegates, ladies and gentlemen.
The
people of Guatemala greet the world. I greeted you in the language of the Quiché people, one of the ancestral and most influential communities of Guatemala. Their power and that of the various peoples of Guatemala is what sustains our government. It is the strength of our country. It is the resounding voice of those that have not been heard, of those that have been marginalized, but who have a lot to say, a lot to contribute, who have a place to play in building our collective future. I'm here as a result of two clear expressions of popular will. The first, a vote which unanimously rejected the representatives of the authoritarian past of Guatemala, and it granted me the honor of the presidency to lead the national effort to move towards a future of justice, equality, and progress. The second was the defense that the society of Guatemala, by various means of expression, reaffirmed and defended on the streets with regard to the decision that they took at the polls when a corrupt minority attempted to impose their further rule and cheat democracy. Our democracy will not be complete, it could not exist, without the impetus which is so decisive and courageous of the Mayan people of Guatemala, of people of mixed descent, of the Garinagu people of the Caribbean and of the Xinca people. It is a democracy that comes from the four corners of the country, from these four peoples. Together we form a nation. And the role of our government is to give a sense of unity to this diversity and to move forwards towards a prosperous and inclusive future. I would like to express particular thanks on the part of Guatemala to the countries, peoples and governments that were together with us, together with the people of Guatemala during this historic gesture in 2023, and for the support that they continue to give us in our efforts to rescue our democratic institutions. And we are doing this through dialogue, a dialogue which is part of a great national consensus, something which all Guatemalans share over and above our ideological differences, our cultural diversity, our various ways of seeing the world. And I am sure that in this forum everyone can identify with this consensus. Namely, we cannot continue to tolerate corruption. Corruption, when the few abuse what belongs to everyone to benefit themselves, is like an anchor that chains us to the past, and it prevents us from growing, from prospering and building a society which is based on the common good. In the case of Guatemala, corruption's roots are buried in our authoritarian past of repression, of political violence, of social exclusion. But we are breaking free from this. We are freeing ourselves from the chains of the dark past, and what we are seeing reborn is a young, creative, vital, joyous but anxious nation. Young people who will not be silent in the light of injustices and in the light of corruption. A diverse community that is building the future, a future where everyone has a seat at the table, where opportunities multiply, where cooperation and solidarity optimize talent, creativity, and individual efforts, where parents are able to sleep peacefully knowing that health and educational opportunities for their children are will be guaranteed, where work will be fairly remunerated, and where prosperity will not require immoral acts of corruption, where the earth, our earth, will be treated with gratitude and respect, and it will give us in exchange clean spaces for us to work, to live, to recreate ourselves, to grow. This is the future that we are building for Guatemala. And this future is not emerging in a vacuum. For us, we see it as coming from within, from our principles, from our own values, from our own cosmovision. Our government is made up of the diverse peoples of Guatemala, and these are the values and the vision of these four peoples. They are the instruments that we are using to navigate this ocean of transformation. In the same way, this very important forum, and so necessary for global coexistence and for the progress of all nations, must look inwards and return to its fundamental values and use them to navigate the complex reality that we are facing today as a planet. The time has come to rescue multilateralism, to revitalize dialogue for peace, and to take concrete actions in order to resolve the most urgent problems afflicting us. Let us begin at the beginning. War, this horror that motivated the opening of this global forum, has commanded once again our attention. It is becoming a permanent reality, but in the recent last 2 years has become desperate, an intensity that we did not expect. We cannot tolerate it. We cannot tolerate war. We cannot ignore international conflicts that affect the peace and security of us all. We must not abandon hope of a world without war, of a future of peace. Guatemala would like to reiterate its solidarity with countries that are suffering from armed conflicts and unjustified wars. We would call upon the members of this Assembly to redouble regional and international efforts so that we can find peaceful solutions to our disputes based on respect for international law and international humanitarian law and the fundamental principle of human dignity. We cannot accept any violation of the United Nations Charter or of the Security Council resolutions by any member state of this organization. Not in Ukraine, not in Gaza, not in Sudan, and not in any other part of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, rescuing multilateralism as a fundamental principle for the international system is an urgent necessity. And for each and every one of the nations that make up this forum, it's an unavoidable commitment if we really and sincerely want a future of peace and progress. Only with substantial reforms can we resume the path that we set out on when this organization was founded in 1945. A multipolar world needs new focuses which will be adapted to emerging needs of nations. We support the reform of the Security Council. Once again, it should resume a collective approach that is pacifist and democratic in the way it acts. It's not acceptable that decisions are not adopted in favor of peace because of the right exercised by the few. I'm referring to the right of veto. And with that, avoiding decisions being taken that are hard-hitting against those states which repeatedly violate the charter of this organization. Let us recall to the members of the Security Council that it is their primary responsibility to maintain international peace and international security, and that in the performance of its functions it must proceed according to the purposes and principles of the United Nations.